Have you ever been judged, dismissed, and underestimated before you even had a chance to prove yourself? When brilliant 16-year-old Marcus Johnson steps into Mrs. Winter's English class, he's met with cold eyes and colder assumptions. Despite his passion for literature and exceptional mind, her verdict is swift: you can't pass. But what Mrs. Winters doesn't realize is that her dismissive words have lit a fire that will illuminate the darkness of her prejudice. Will Marcus crumble under her judgment, or will his excellence become the response that changes everything? Dear viewer, watch or listen this full story to witness a journey that will leave you breathless. And, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson stood outside the imposing brick facade of Wellington Preparatory Academy, his heart pounding against his ribs. The crisp September air carried whispers of autumn, but it was the whispers of the students filing past him that made his palms sweat. After 3 years at his previous school where he'd maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, this mid-semester transfer felt like starting over from scratch. "You've got this," he whispered to himself, gripping the strap of his backpack. His father's words from that morning echoed in his mind: "Show them who Marcus Johnson really is." Room 237, Advanced English Literature. Marcus checked his schedule one last time before pushing open the heavy wooden door. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him simultaneously, followed by an uncomfortable silence. At the front of the classroom stood Mrs. Eleanor Winters. Her steel-gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, accentuating sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to evaluate and dismiss him in a single glance. Her pearl necklace gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she extended a thin hand for his transfer slip. "Mr. Johnson, I presume?" Her voice carried the practiced articulation of someone who'd spent decades correcting others' pronunciation. "You're late." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was meeting with the guidance counselor too." "We begin class precisely at 8:30, Mrs. Winters interrupted, examining his paperwork with narrowed eyes. "At Wellington, punctuality is considered a form of respect." Marcus nodded, swallowing the explanation that died in his throat. "Robinson High," Mrs. Winters read from his transcript, her eyebrow arching slightly. "I'm not familiar with their curriculum. I wonder if it's compatible with our advanced placement standards." A few students exchanged glances. Marcus felt his face grow warm. "I completed their honors program, ma'am," he offered quietly. Mrs. Winters handed back his slip with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see how you adjust. Take the empty seat in the back row." As Marcus made his way to the indicated desk, Mrs. Winters continued, "We're discussing Faulkner's use of stream of consciousness technique. Though perhaps we should backtrack for our new edition." The pointed emphasis on backtrack wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus silently unpacked his notebook. Inside his dog-eared copy of The Sound and the Fury, his own extensive notes filled the margins. Last summer, he'd written a 12-page analysis of the novel that his previous teacher had suggested he submit to a young writers' competition. Can anyone explain why Faulkner's narrative structure represents a departure from traditional storytelling? Mrs. Winters surveyed the room, deliberately avoiding Marcus's raised hand. "Anyone?" When no one else volunteered, Marcus slowly lowered his arm, his enthusiasm dampening like a flame deprived of oxygen. "I expected as much," Mrs. Winters sighed. "For tomorrow, reread chapters 4 through 6 and be prepared to actually participate." As the class ended, Marcus gathered his belongings, a knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't how he'd imagined his fresh start. Outside the classroom, he checked his phone to find a text from his father. "How's the first day going, champ?" Marcus hesitated before typing back, "It's going great, Dad." The Johnson household was modest but meticulously maintained. Medical journals shared shelf space with classic literature, and Marcus's academic awards were displayed alongside his father's framed medical degree from Howard University. Dr. William Johnson had raised Marcus alone since his wife's passing when Marcus was only 7, and their bond was unbreakable. "Mac and cheese tonight," Dr. Johnson announced as Marcus dropped his backpack by the door. Hospital cafeteria was serving mystery meat again. Marcus smiled despite himself. His father's comfort food always appeared after long shifts in the ER. How was day 3 at Wellington? Dr. Johnson asked, placing a steaming plate in front of his son. Marcus pushed the pasta around his plate. Fine. Dr. Johnson sat down across from him, his experienced eyes noting the subtle signs of his son's distress. That fine is carrying about 2 tons of weight. What's really going on? It's Mrs. Winters, Marcus finally admitted. My English teacher. The one you were excited about. The published author. Marcus nodded, recalling the anticipation he'd felt when learning about Mrs. Winters' literary background. He'd even found her collection of short stories at the library and read them cover to cover before starting at Wellington. She doesn't like me, Marcus said simply. And I don't think it has anything to do with my work. Dr. Johnson's expression remained calm, though a shadow passed behind his eyes. Has she said something specific? It's more what she doesn't say. When I raise my hand, she calls on someone else. When I turned in our first assignment, she barely glanced at it before putting it aside. Your last English teacher said you were the most promising writer she'd encountered in 20 years of teaching, Dr. Johnson reminded him. That doesn't seem to matter here. Marcus hesitated before continuing. Today, she returned everyone's essays except mine. When I asked about it after class, she said she hadn't gotten around to it yet but that I shouldn't get my hopes up. Dr. Johnson set down his fork. Did she explain why? She said my writing style was undisciplined and lacked the refinement she expects. But she couldn't give me a single example. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a folded paper, pushing it across the table. This is what I submitted. Dr. Johnson read the essay carefully, his brow furrowing not with concern but with growing admiration. The 5-page analysis of symbolism in The Great Gatsby was sophisticated and insightful, drawing connections that demonstrated deep understanding of both the text and historical context. This is college-level work, Marcus, he said finally, looking up at his son. At Robinson, it would have been, Marcus replied, a rare bitterness creeping into his voice. But Mrs. Winters already decided what kind of student I am the moment I walked through her door. Dr. Johnson nodded slowly, understanding. He'd faced similar judgments throughout his medical career, the constant need to prove himself, the double standards, the assumptions. He'd hoped things would be different for his son. You know what, though? Marcus continued, a spark returning to his eyes. I found the original syllabus from the beginning of the semester. There's a major independent project due before finals that counts for 40% of our grade. I'm going to write something she can't ignore. Dr. Johnson smiled at the determination in his son's voice. That's my boy. Now eat your mac and cheese before it gets cold. Later that night, Marcus sat at his desk, surrounded by books. On his computer screen, a document titled Final Project Outline glowed in the darkness. He may not have been welcomed at Wellington, but he wasn't going to let Mrs. Winters define his worth. 2 weeks passed, and the tension in Mrs. Winters' classroom only intensified. Marcus continued to excel in his other subjects, his calculus teacher had even suggested he consider entering the state math competition, but English literature, once his favorite class, had become a daily exercise in restraint. Today's discussion centered on Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, a novel that had profoundly impacted Marcus when he first read it last year. Mrs. Winters paced at the front of the room, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Ellison's protagonist represents the universal struggle for identity, she explained, her voice carrying the conviction of an unquestionable authority. His invisibility is a metaphor for the human condition, the search for meaning in an indifferent world. Marcus shifted in his seat. The interpretation wasn't wrong, but it missed the novel's searing commentary on race in America. His hand rose almost instinctively. Mrs. Winters' gaze swept past him. Yes, Jennifer. I agree, the blonde girl in the second row replied. It's about feeling out of place, like no one really sees you. Marcus's hand remained raised. After several more students offered similar perspectives, Mrs. Winters finally acknowledged him with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Mr. Johnson has something to add, apparently. Marcus straightened in his seat. I think the novel's exploration of invisibility is specifically about race, not just a universal metaphor. The protagonist is invisible because white society refuses to see him as an individual beyond his skin color. Ellison was explicitly writing about the African American experience. The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Winter's lips thinned to a tight line. "That's a rather narrow reading," she replied coolly. Reducing a literary masterpiece to mere social commentary diminishes its artistic value. Great literature transcends such limitations. "With all due respect, Mrs. Winters," Marcus continued, his heart pounding but his voice steady, "Ellison himself said the novel addressed the invisibility of my people. Ignoring the racial context erases its core meaning." Several students glanced between Marcus and Mrs. Winters, the tension palpable. "Perhaps at your previous school, such surface-level analysis was acceptable," Mrs. Winters said, her tone cutting. "At Wellington, we expect greater sophistication." The dismissal bell rang, saving Marcus from responding. As students filed out, he remained behind, approaching Mrs. Winters' desk. "Mrs. Winters, I was hoping to get some additional reading recommendations on African American literature. I'm thinking about focusing my final project on—" "Mr. Johnson," she interrupted, not looking up from her papers. "Given your performance thus far, I would advise against taking on such ambitious material. But I've maintained an A average in your class despite my generous grading, yes." Now she looked up, her gaze cold. "Let me be direct. Don't waste your time. You can't pass my advanced course with mediocre work disguised as cultural insight." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood frozen as Mrs. Winters gathered her materials and swept out of the classroom, leaving him alone with the echo of her verdict. That night, for the first time since arriving at Wellington, Marcus cried, not from sadness but from pure, burning frustration. Then he opened his laptop and began to write. Saturday morning in the Johnson household began as it always had, with the aroma of Dr. Johnson's famous blueberry pancakes and the jazz melodies of Miles Davis filling the small kitchen. But as Marcus descended the stairs, his father immediately noticed the shadows beneath his son's eyes. "Late night?" Dr. Johnson asked, sliding a stack of pancakes onto Marcus's plate. Marcus nodded, pouring maple syrup absently. "Working on some stuff for school. The famous Wellington workload I've been hearing about." Dr. Johnson took a seat across from his son, studying him with the careful attention he usually reserved for difficult diagnoses. "Or something else?" Marcus hesitated, pushing his pancakes around his plate. He'd avoided sharing the full extent of his struggles at Wellington, not wanting to burden his father who already worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital. But the weight of Mrs. Winters' words had become too heavy to carry alone. "She told me I can't pass her class," Marcus finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not that I'm failing, I've turned in every assignment, participated in every discussion. She just decided I can't succeed." Dr. Johnson's hands stilled around his coffee mug. "Tell me exactly what happened." As Marcus recounted the confrontation, his father listened without interruption, his expression shifting between concern and controlled anger. When Marcus finished, silence hung between them for several long moments. "You know," Dr. Johnson finally said, "my first year of residency, the attending physician would present cases to the team but never call on me for diagnosis suggestions. When I asked why, he said my background might not have prepared me for this level of medicine." Marcus looked up, surprised. His father rarely spoke about such experiences. "What did you do?" "I diagnosed a case of Guillain-Barré syndrome that everyone else had missed," Dr. Johnson replied, a hint of pride breaking through his usual humility. "The patient was hours away from permanent nerve damage. After that, the attending couldn't ignore me anymore." He reached across the table, placing his hand over his son's. "People like Mrs. Winters exist everywhere, Marcus. They've decided who you are before you open your mouth. Your excellence is the only response they can't dismiss." "But how?" Marcus asked, frustration edging his voice. "She's already decided my work isn't good enough." "Then make it undeniable," Dr. Johnson said simply. "When I was facing that attending, I studied twice as hard as everyone else. I prepared for every case like my career depended on it, because it did." Marcus nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. The final project. Show her what Marcus Johnson is truly capable of, his father affirmed. Not for her approval, but because that's who you are. After breakfast, Marcus retreated to his room and opened his laptop. The document he'd started the night before, an outline for his final project, stared back at him. With renewed determination, he began to reshape it, infusing it with all the passion, intelligence, and insight that Mrs. Winters refused to see. For the first time since arriving at Wellington, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than his frustration. His father was right. Excellence would be his response. The Wellington Preparatory Academy Library was a sanctuary of mahogany shelves and leather-bound volumes, typically empty during lunch period. For Marcus, it had become his refuge, a place where Mrs. Winters' voice couldn't reach him. Back again, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Rivera, the elderly librarian, smiled warmly as Marcus settled at his usual corner table. Her silver-streaked hair and kind eyes reminded him of his grandmother. Working on something special, Marcus replied, pulling out his notebook. Ms. Rivera placed a stack of books beside him. Those titles on African American literature you requested. I added a few others you might find interesting. Thank you, Marcus said, genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. As other students socialized in a cafeteria, Marcus immersed himself in research. His final project had evolved from a standard literary analysis into something more personal, an exploration of identity and voice in literature, weaving together critical analysis with his own experiences as a young black man encountering these works. The library door swung open, and Marcus glanced up to see Mrs. Winters enter, heading straight to the reference section. He ducked his head instinctively, but not before their eyes met briefly. Her expression remained impassive as she collected several books and departed without acknowledgement. Don't mind her, Ms. Rivera whispered, appearing beside Marcus's table. She wasn't always like this, you know. Marcus looked up, curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Ms. Rivera glanced toward the door before sitting down. Eleanor Winters published her first collection of short stories 30 years ago. It was brilliant, stories about broken people finding their humanity. Critics predicted she'd become one of the great American writers. What happened? Marcus asked. Her novel was rejected by 17 publishers. Then her husband left, and she had to raise her daughter alone. Ms. Rivera sighed. She took the teaching position here as a temporary measure, but temporary became permanent. I think she resents students with the potential she once had. Marcus absorbed this information, seeing Mrs. Winters in a new light, not excusing her behavior, but understanding its possible roots. Have you read her stories? He asked. Ms. Rivera nodded. We have a copy. First edition, rarely checked out. That afternoon, Marcus left the library with Mrs. Winters' book tucked in his backpack, alongside pages of notes for his project. Reading her work might provide insight into the woman who seemed determined to see him fail. Later that night, Marcus sat cross-legged on his bed, captivated by Mrs. Winters' stories. They were indeed extraordinary, tender, insightful explorations of human frailty and resilience. The voice on these pages bore no resemblance to the bitter woman who dismissed him daily. One story particularly struck him, about a promising young pianist whose dreams were derailed by circumstances beyond her control. The character's slow transformation from hopeful artist to resentful teacher was rendered with painful precision. Marcus closed the book, a plan forming in his mind. Understanding Mrs. Winters wouldn't change her treatment of him, but it might help him reach her with his final project. He opened his laptop and began revising his outline, incorporating elements that might speak to the person she once was, the writer who understood human struggle before becoming trapped in her own. As dawn broke, Marcus finally fell asleep, his notebook filled with new ideas and his heart with cautious hope. Marcus, could I speak with you for a moment? Mr. Diaz, Marcus's U.S. history teacher, motioned him to stay after class. Unlike Mrs. Winters, Mr. Diaz had recognized Marcus's abilities immediately, often encouraging him to share his perspectives during discussions. Your paper on the civil rights movement was exceptional, Mr. Diaz said, handing back Marcus's essay with an A+ marked in red. Your analysis of how economic factors influenced movement strategy shows remarkable insight. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied, surprised by the praise after weeks of Mrs. Winters' dismissal. Mr. Diaz hesitated before continuing. "I've noticed you're quieter than usual lately. Is everything all right?" Marcus considered deflecting the question, but something in Mr. Diaz's genuine concern broke through his defenses. "It's Mrs. Winters' class," he admitted. "I'm working hard, but nothing I do seems good enough." Mr. Diaz's expression shifted subtly. "You're not the first student to mention this." "I'm not." Marcus felt a strange relief knowing he wasn't alone. "Mrs. Winters has specific expectations," Mr. Diaz chose his words carefully. "But you should know that other teachers have noticed your exceptional work. Principal Edwards was particularly impressed by your contributions during last week's assembly discussion." At lunch, Marcus found himself surrounded by classmates for the first time since arriving at Wellington. Sophia Chen, who sat 2 rows ahead in English, slid her tray beside his. "That was brave, what you said about Invisible Man," she remarked. "Winters nearly had a coronary." Tyler Washington, one of the few other black students in advanced placement classes, joined them. "Nobody challenges the Winters world order," he said with a grin. "But someone should." Her comments on my midterm paper basically suggested I plagiarized because it was unexpectedly articulate. As they shared stories, Marcus realized he wasn't the only target of Mrs. Winters' prejudice. Sophia, whose parents had immigrated from China, described how Mrs. Winters consistently mispronounced her name despite corrections. Tyler detailed subtle dismissals similar to Marcus's experiences. "You guys are all working on the final project?" Marcus asked. Tyler nodded grimly. 40% of our grade. Make or break territory. "We should form a study group," Sophia suggested. "Not to collaborate on content, but to review each other's work before submission." For the first time at Wellington, Marcus felt part of a community. The isolation that had weighed on him began to lift as they exchanged phone numbers and arranged to meet at the public library that weekend. Meanwhile, in Principal Edwards' office, another conversation was taking place. The 65-year-old administrator, whose distinguished career had earned him both respect and authority, reviewed a spreadsheet with furrowed brows. "These grading patterns are concerning, Gloria," he said to the curriculum director seated across from him. "Mrs. Winters' assessment of minority students shows a statistical disparity that can't be coincidental. We've received complaints before," Gloria acknowledged, "but Mrs. Winters' tenure and her reputation make this delicate." "Delicate or not, we have an obligation to ensure fair treatment," Principal Edwards responded firmly. "I've scheduled a classroom observation for next week. And I want to review her grading rubrics for the final project." As they spoke, Dr. Johnson was opening an email from Wellington Preparatory Academy. The subject line read, "Regarding Marcus Johnson's academic performance." With growing concern, he clicked to open it. "Dear Dr. Johnson," the email began, "I'm writing to inform you that your son's performance in advanced English literature indicates he may be improperly placed. Unless significant improvement is demonstrated before final assessments, we recommend transferring to standard level English for the remainder of the academic year. Please contact me to discuss this matter. Sincerely, Eleanor Winters." Dr. Johnson read the email twice, his emergency room calm giving way to parental indignation. He reached for his phone and dialed the school's administrative office. "This is Dr. William Johnson," he stated firmly. "I'd like to schedule a meeting with Mrs. Winters and Principal Edwards regarding my son's placement. As soon as possible." Principal Edwards' office was designed to project authority, oak paneling, leather chairs, and framed educational accolades spanning 4 decades. But today, the room felt more like a courtroom than an administrative space. Dr. Johnson sat with impeccable posture, his hospital badge still clipped to his shirt pocket after coming directly from his shift. Across from him, Mrs. Winters maintained her usual rigid demeanor, though her fingers betrayed her tension as they drummed silently against her portfolio. Principal Edwards entered, his tall frame commanding immediate attention. "Thank you both for agreeing to this meeting on such short notice," he began, settling behind his desk. "Dr. Johnson, I understand you have concerns about Marcus's placement in advanced English literature." "My concern," Dr. Johnson replied evenly, "is not about Marcus's placement but about Mrs. Winters' assessment of his abilities. My son has consistently excelled in English throughout his academic career. Mrs. Winters cleared her throat. Wellington's standards are exceptionally high, Dr. Johnson. While Marcus seems bright, his analytical skills lack the sophistication required for advanced coursework. Could you provide specific examples? Principal Edwards asked. Mrs. Winters opened her portfolio, presenting several of Marcus's assignments. His analysis of Fitzgerald focuses on historical context rather than literary technique, and his interpretation of Ellison's work demonstrates a concerning tendency to view literature through a narrow sociopolitical lens. Dr. Johnson leaned forward, his calm exterior belying the anger building beneath. I've reviewed these papers, Mrs. Winters. They show depth of understanding and original thinking. Marcus specifically addressed both historical context and literary technique in his Fitzgerald analysis, techniques like symbolism, narrative voice, and thematic development. Perhaps to an untrained eye, Mrs. Winters began. I hold 2 degrees in addition to my medical doctorate, Dr. Johnson interrupted, his voice still measured but firm. Including a bachelor's in English literature from Howard University. I am not an untrained eye. And regardless, these papers would earn top marks at any school in this district. Principal Edwards reached for the papers, examining them with careful attention. Mrs. Winters, I notice Marcus's paper on Fitzgerald received a C+, yet there are no substantive comments explaining this grade. I maintain extensive grading notes separately, she replied defensively. I'd like to see those, Principal Edwards said, the request clearly non-negotiable. As Mrs. Winters shuffled through her materials, Principal Edwards turned to Dr. Johnson. How is Marcus adjusting to Wellington otherwise? He's thriving in every other class, Dr. Johnson replied. His calculus teacher is recommending him for advanced placement next year. His history teacher described his work as collegiate level. Only in Mrs. Winters' class is he supposedly underperforming. A weighted silence filled the room as Principal Edwards studied the grading notes Mrs. Winters finally produced. His expression remained neutral, but the slight tightening around his eyes revealed concern. Mrs. Winters, these comments don't align with the quality of work I'm seeing, he finally said. And I notice similar patterns in your assessments of other students. What patterns? Mrs. Winters asked sharply. Principal Edwards met her gaze directly. We can discuss that separately. For now, I'd like to address Dr. Johnson's concerns about fair evaluation. Are you questioning my professional judgment? Mrs. Winters' voice rose slightly, her composure slipping. I'm questioning whether Marcus Johnson is receiving the same consideration as other students, Principal Edwards replied calmly. Mrs. Winters stood abruptly. I've been teaching at Wellington for 23 years. My standards have always been rigorous but fair. Then you won't object to having Marcus's final project evaluated by another member of the English department, Principal Edwards suggested. That's unprecedented, Mrs. Winters protested. So is recommending a student with Marcus's record be demoted to standard-level coursework mid-semester, Dr. Johnson countered, rising to his full height. Principal Edwards, I appreciate your attention to this matter, but I need to be direct. If my son continues to be evaluated unfairly, I'll have no choice but to escalate this issue to the school board and beyond. The implicit meaning was clear. Dr. Johnson wasn't just any parent, he was a respected physician with connections and resources. That won't be necessary, Principal Edwards assured him. I'll personally ensure Marcus receives fair assessment going forward. As they left the office, Mrs. Winters hurried ahead, but Dr. Johnson's voice stopped her in the empty hallway. Mrs. Winters, he said quietly. My son admires your writing. She turned, surprise momentarily breaking through her composure. He found your short story collection in the library, Dr. Johnson continued. He said your stories show remarkable empathy for people struggling to be seen for who they truly are. I find that ironic, don't you? For the first time, Mrs. Winters seemed at a loss for words as Dr. Johnson walked past her, his dignity intact and his message delivered. The tension in the advanced English literature classroom was palpable the following Monday. Mrs. Winters entered precisely at 8:30, as always, but something in her demeanor had shifted, a tightness around her mouth, a deliberate avoidance of Marcus's section of the room. Today we discussed the final project, she announced, distributing printed guidelines. This assignment constitutes 40% of your semester grade and will demonstrate your cumulative understanding of the literary concepts we've covered. Marcus accepted his copy, exchanging a quick glance with Sophia and Tyler. Since forming their study group, the three had become inseparable allies, supporting each other through Mrs. Winters' class and beyond. You will select one theme we've explored this semester, Mrs. Winters continued, and examine its development across 3 works by different authors. Your analysis should demonstrate sophisticated understanding of literary techniques and cultural context. As she elaborated on requirements, Marcus carefully noted each point. This project would be his opportunity to prove himself, not just to Mrs. Winters, but to everyone at Wellington. Final submissions are due in 3 weeks, Mrs. Winters concluded. I expect excellence from all of you. Her gaze swept the room but carefully avoided Marcus. The confrontation with his father and Principal Edwards had clearly affected her, though not in a way that suggested any softening of her position. That afternoon, Marcus met Sophia and Tyler at the public library to discuss their approaches. I'm focusing on the concept of the American dream across Fitzgerald, Miller, and Baldwin, Sophia explained, her notebook already filled with organized notes. I'm comparing narrative unreliability in Ishiguro, Nabokov, and Morrison, Tyler added. What about you, Marcus? Marcus hesitated before sharing. I'm exploring voice and identity in literature, specifically how authors use language and story structure to communicate experiences that mainstream society often overlooks or misunderstands. That sounds powerful, Sophia said encouragingly. It's risky, Tyler warned. Winters might see it as too political. Maybe, Marcus acknowledged. But it's the project I need to write. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus poured everything into his work. He analyzed texts with meticulous attention, integrated critical theory, and, most daringly, incorporated elements of his personal experience as a framework for understanding the literature. His father provided quiet support, bringing sandwiches to his room during late-night writing sessions and offering thoughtful feedback on drafts. Ms. Rivera helped him locate obscure references in the Wellington Library. Mr. Diaz suggested additional sources that strengthened his analysis. The night before the submission deadline, Marcus made a bold decision. He added one final section to his project, an analysis of Eleanor Winters' short story, The Pianist, connecting its themes of thwarted potential and resentment to the broader literary tradition of lost dreams in American fiction. When he finally printed the completed project, 22 pages of carefully crafted analysis, dawn was breaking. Marcus felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had created something truly his own, regardless of how Mrs. Winters might receive it. Later that day, students filed into Mrs. Winters' classroom, clutching their projects with varying degrees of confidence. One by one, they placed their work on her desk, receiving in return only a curt nod of acknowledgement. When Marcus's turn came, he placed his project atop the growing stack. Mrs. Winters reached for it automatically, then paused, noticing the title page, Finding Voice, Identity and Recognition in American Literature. For a brief moment, their eyes met, Marcus's calm and assured, Mrs. Winters unreadable. Without a word, she added his project to the stack and called for the next student. That evening, alone in her classroom, Mrs. Winters began reviewing the submissions. She saved Marcus's for last, approaching it with the same skepticism she'd shown toward all his previous work. As minutes turned to hours, her red pen remained unused on her desk. Marcus's analysis was not merely competent, it was exceptional. His seamless integration of literary theory, textual analysis, and cultural context demonstrated a sophistication rarely seen in students twice his age. But it was his analysis of her own work that finally broke through her armor. Reading his interpretation of The Pianist, Mrs. Winters saw her story, and herself, through new eyes. The recognition was uncomfortable, piercing through layers of bitterness built over decades. By the time she reached the final page, tears had formed in her eyes. For the first time in years, Eleanor Winters confronted her reflection and did not like what she saw. An unusual silence permeated Mrs. Winters' classroom as students filed in the following Monday. Graded final projects sat in neat stacks on her desk, each bearing the weight of 40% of their semester grade. Marcus took his seat, exchanging nervous glances with Sophia and Tyler. Mrs. Winters stood at the front of the room, her customary severity present but somehow altered. Dark circles beneath her eyes suggested sleepless nights. "Before I return your projects," she began, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "I want to acknowledge something important. Effective teaching requires ongoing self-evaluation and, when necessary, correction." Confused murmurs rippled through the classroom. This deviation from Mrs. Winters' typical no-nonsense approach was unprecedented. "Your final projects have been evaluated based strictly on academic merit," she continued. "Some of you may be surprised by your grades, in both directions." She began calling students forward alphabetically. Some returned to their seats looking relieved, others disappointed. When she reached Johnson, Marcus approached her desk with measured steps, bracing himself for disappointment despite his best efforts. Mrs. Winters handed him his project. "Exceptional work, Mr. Johnson," she said, loud enough for the entire class to hear. Marcus stared at the cover page where an A+ was written in red ink, accompanied by a comment, "Collegiate-level analysis. The strongest project I've received in years." Stunned, Marcus returned to his seat. As he flipped through the pages, he found detailed positive comments throughout, acknowledging his insights, praising his integration of critical theory, noting the sophistication of his cultural analysis. After class, Mrs. Winters asked Marcus to remain behind. For a moment, they stood in awkward silence. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Johnson," she finally said, the words seemingly difficult for her to articulate. "Your project forced me to confront certain biases in my evaluation methods." Marcus remained silent, processing her unexpected contrition. "Your analysis of my story was particularly insightful," she continued. "No student has ever connected my work to the broader themes we study. It was illuminating." "Thank you," Marcus replied, uncertain how to navigate this sudden shift. "I've recommended your project for the Wellington Literary Award," Mrs. Winters added. "And I've submitted my grading records for all students this semester for review. Principal Edwards will be speaking with you about that." As Marcus left the classroom, he found Principal Edwards waiting in the hallway. "Marcus, could I have a moment?" The older man gestured toward his office. Once seated, Principal Edwards didn't mince words. "Mrs. Winters came to me last week with concerning information. Her review of past grading patterns revealed statistical disparities affecting minority students. She's requested an independent audit of her grading practices going back 5 years." Marcus absorbed this information, recognizing the significance of Mrs. Winters' self-reporting. "This doesn't erase what happened," Principal Edwards continued, "but it's an important step toward institutional accountability. Your father's advocacy and your exceptional work created a moment of genuine reflection." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "The audit will proceed. Mrs. Winters has also proposed a mentorship program pairing seniors with underclassmen from underrepresented backgrounds." Principal Edwards smiled slightly. "And your final project will be published in the school's literary journal." That evening, Marcus shared the news with his father over dinner. Dr. Johnson listened intently, pride evident in his eyes. "You know what this means, don't you?" he asked as Marcus finished recounting the day's events. "That I proved her wrong." Dr. Johnson shook his head. "That you helped her see herself clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. That's a more significant victory than any grade." As they continued their dinner, Marcus reflected on his journey at Wellington, from isolation to vindication. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but something fundamental had shifted, not just for him but for students who would come after him. The Wellington Preparatory Academy auditorium buzzed with end-of-semester excitement. Students, parents, and faculty gathered for the annual Academic Excellence Award ceremony. Marcus sat between his father and Tyler, with Sophia and her parents in the row behind them. "I still can't believe Mrs. Winters nominated you for the Literary Excellence Award," Tyler whispered. "That's like Voldemort recommending Harry for Wizard of the Year." Marcus smiled but remained thoughtful. In the weeks following the return of their final projects, Mrs. Winters had undergone a remarkable transformation. Her classroom demeanor remained demanding, but her evaluations had become scrupulously fair, her feedback constructive rather than dismissive. Principal Edwards approached the podium. Before we present our subject-specific awards, I'd like to announce an important new initiative at Wellington. He outlined the creation of the Academic Equity Committee, tasked with reviewing educational practices to ensure all students received equal opportunity and assessment. Mrs. Winters, surprisingly, would serve as faculty advisor alongside Mr. Diaz. The ceremony progressed through mathematics, science, and history awards. When they reached literature, Mrs. Winters took the podium, her usual pearl necklace replaced by a simple silver pendant. The Literary Excellence Award recognizes exceptional analytical ability, original thinking, and mastery of both form and content, she began. This year's recipient demonstrated all these qualities and something more, the courage to challenge established perspectives and offer new frameworks for understanding. A hush fell over the auditorium. The award goes to Marcus Johnson, for his project Finding Voice, Identity and Recognition in American Literature. Applause erupted as Marcus made his way to the stage. Dr. Johnson stood, clapping with undisguised pride. As Marcus accepted the award, Mrs. Winters extended her hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice carrying genuine respect. "Wellington is fortunate to have you." After the ceremony, as attendees mingled in the reception area, Dr. Johnson found himself face-to-face with Mrs. Winters. "Dr. Johnson," she acknowledged him with a slight nod. "Your son is an extraordinary young man." "He is," Dr. Johnson agreed. "Though I wonder how many other extraordinary young people have passed through your classroom unrecognized over the years." Mrs. Winters didn't flinch from the implied criticism. "Too many," she admitted. "That's something I'm working to address now." Nearby, Marcus found himself surrounded by younger students, several of whom were considering advanced placement courses for the following year. "Is it true you stood up to Mrs. Winters?" a freshman asked, eyes wide with admiration. "I didn't stand up to her," Marcus corrected gently. "I just refused to let anyone else define my capabilities." As the evening drew to a close, Principal Edwards took the podium one last time. "Today we celebrate academic achievement, but let us also recognize a more profound lesson that unfolded in our community this semester," he said. "True education isn't just about acquiring knowledge, it's about growing as human beings, recognizing our biases, and having the courage to change." His gaze swept across the audience, lingering briefly on Marcus, Dr. Johnson, and Mrs. Winters. "Wellington has always prided itself on excellence," he continued. "But excellence without equality is merely privilege. Moving forward, we commit to creating an environment where every student is seen, heard, and evaluated based solely on the content of their work and the quality of their character." As they left the auditorium, Marcus paused in a hallway where display cases showcased student achievements. His project now occupied a prominent position, alongside publications by Wellington alumni. "You did it, son," Dr. Johnson said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We did it," Marcus corrected, thinking of everyone who had supported him, his father, Mr. Diaz, Ms. Rivera, Sophia, Tyler, and even Principal Edwards. Outside, stars punctuated the night sky as families dispersed to their cars. Mrs. Winters stood alone near the entrance, watching the departing crowds. As Marcus and his father passed, she straightened slightly. "Mr. Johnson," she called softly. When Marcus turned, she simply said, "Thank you." No further explanation was necessary. In challenging her to see him clearly, Marcus had helped Mrs. Winters begin to see herself again, not just the bitter, dismissive teacher she had become, but the insightful writer she once was and perhaps could be again. As they drove home, Marcus gazed out the window, reflecting on his journey. He had entered Wellington seeking merely to survive in a new environment. He was leaving having catalyzed change that would benefit countless students after him. "You know what the best part is, Dad," he said as they turned onto their street. "What's that?" "I didn't just prove I could pass," Marcus replied, a quiet confidence in his voice. "I showed that excellence doesn't look just one way. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all." Dear friend, stories like Marcus's remind us that prejudice often lurks in the places we least expect, even in our educational institutions. Yet this tale also shows us the transformative power of perseverance, integrity, and excellence in the face of discrimination. When we refuse to be defined by others' limited perceptions, we not only change our own trajectories but sometimes help others confront their biases too. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on your own experiences with prejudice, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. By subscribing to our channel, you support more content that challenges stereotypes and celebrates the human capacity for growth and change. Together, we can create a world where talent is recognized regardless of appearance.